Welcome to Miss Martin Muses. Welcome to Miss Martin Muses, where we muse upon what makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me happy, makes me sad, or just really ticks me off. Well, today we're going to talk about something that makes me very happy. A lovely story that Tolkien left us about the rings of power, as opposed to the story Tolkien never wrote about the rings of power. This is the third video in my series on letter 131. The first two videos dealt with the first age. Now we're moving into the second age. Let's enjoy Tolkien himself summarizing the story he wrote. The next cycle deals, or would deal, with the second age. It is on Earth a dark age, and not very much of its history is or need be told. In the great battles against the first enemy, the lands were broken and ruined, and the west of Middle-earth became desolate. We learn that the exiled elves were, if not commanded, at least sternly counseled to return into the west and there be at peace. They were not to dwell permanently in Valinor again, but in the lonely isle of Erisea, within sight of the Blessed Realm. The men of the three houses were rewarded for their valor and faithful alliance by being allowed to dwell westernmost of all mortals in the great Atlantis Isle of Numenor. The doom, or gift of God, of mortality, the gods of course cannot abrogate, but the Numenorians have a great span of life. They set sail and leave Middle-earth and establish a great kingdom of mariners just within furthest sight of Erisea, but not of Valinor. Most of the high elves depart back into the west, not all. Some men, akin to the Numenorians, remain in the land not far from the shores of the sea. Some of the exiles will not return, or delay their return, for the way west is ever open to the immortals, and in the gray havens ships are ever ready to sail away forever. Also the orcs, goblins, and other monsters bred by the first enemy are not wholly destroyed. I want to remind you that when he refers to the first enemy, he is referring to Melkor. And there is Sauron. In the Silmarillion and Tales of the First Age, Sauron was a being of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy and becoming his chief captain and servant. He repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, but in the end does not do as was commanded, return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth, very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth, neglected by the gods. He becomes a reincarnation of evil, and a thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. All through the second twilight of the second age, the shadow is growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men, who multiply as the elves begin to fade. The three main themes are thus: the delaying elves that lingered in Middle-earth, Sauron's growth to a new dark lord, master and god of men, and Numenor Atlantis. They are dealt with analytically and in two tales or accounts: the Rings of Power and the Downfall of Numenor. Both are essential background to The Hobbit and its sequel. In the first, we see a sort of second fall, or at least error, of the elves. There was nothing wrong essentially in their lingering against counsel, still sadly with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds. But they wanted to have their cake without eating it. They wanted the peace and bliss and perfect memory of the West, and yet to remain on the ordinary earth, where their prestige as the highest people, above wild elves, dwarves, and men, was greater than at the bottom of the hierarchy of Valinor. They thus became obsessed with fading, the mode in which the changes of time, the law of the world under the sun, was perceived by them. They became sad, and their art, shall we say, antiquarian, and their efforts all really a kind of embalming, even though they also retained the old motive of their kind, the adornment of earth and the healing of its hurts. We hear of a lingering kingdom in the extreme northwest, more or less in what was left in the old lands of the Silmarillion under Gilgalad, and of other settlements such as Imladris, Rivendell, near Elrond, and a great one at Eregion at the western feet of the Misty Mountains, adjacent to the mines of Moria, the major realm of the dwarves in the Second Age. There arose a friendship between the usually hostile folk of elves and dwarves for the first and only time, and smithcraft reached its highest development. But many of the elves listened to Sauron. He was still fair in that early time, and his motives and those of the elves seemed to go partly together. The healing of the desolate lands. Sauron found their weak point in suggesting that, helping one another, they could make Western Middle Earth as beautiful as Valinor. It was really a veiled attack on the gods, an incitement to try and make a separate, independent paradise. Gilgalad repulsed all such overtures, as also did Elrond. But at Eregion, great work began, and the elves came their nearest to falling to magic and machinery. With the aid of Sauron's lore, they made rings of power. Power is an ominous and sinister word in all these tales, except as applied to the gods. The chief power of all rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay, that is, change viewed as a regrettable thing. The preservation of what is desired or loved, or its semblance. This is more or less an elvish motive. But they also enhance the natural powers of a possessor, thus approaching magic, a motive easily corruptible into evil, a lust for domination. And finally, they had other powers, more directly derived from Sauron, the necromancer, so he is called, as he casts a fleeting shadow and presage on the pages of The Hobbit, such as rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. The elves of Eregion made 3 supremely beautiful and powerful rings, almost solely of their own imagination, and directed to the preservation of beauty. They did not confer invisibility, but secretly in the subterranean fire in his own black land, Sauron made one ring, the ruling ring, that contained the powers of all the others and controlled them, so that its wearer could see the thoughts of all those that used the lesser rings, could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. He reckoned, however, without the wisdom and subtle perception of the elves. The moment he assumed the one, they were aware of it, and of his secret purpose, and were afraid. They hid the 3 rings, so that not even Sauron ever discovered where they were, and they remained unsullied. The others they tried to destroy. In the resulting war between Sauron and the elves, Middle-earth, especially in the west, was further ruined. Eregion was captured and destroyed, and Sauron seized many rings of power. These he gave for their ultimate corruption and enslavement to those who would accept them out of ambition or greed. Hence the ancient rhyme that appears as the leitmotif of The Lord of the Rings. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Sauron became thus almost supreme in Middle-earth. The elves held out in secret places, not yet revealed. The last elf kingdom of Gilgalad is maintained precariously on the extreme west shores, where are the havens of the ships. Elrond, the half-elven son of Arundel, maintains a kind of enchanted sanctuary at Imladris, in English Rivendell, on the extreme eastern margin of the western lands. But Sauron dominates all the multiplying hordes of men that have had no contact with the elves, and so indirectly with the true and unfallen Valar and gods. But Sauron dominates all the multiplying hordes of men that have had no contact with the elves, and so indirectly with the true and unfallen Valar and gods. He rules a growing kingdom from the great tower of Barad-dûr in Mordor, near to the mountain of fire, wielding the One Ring. But to achieve this, he had been obliged to let a great part of his own inherent power, a frequent and very significant motive in myth and fairy story, pass into the One Ring. While he wore it, his power on earth was actually enhanced. But even if he did not wear it, the power existed and was in rapport with himself. He was not diminished, unless some other seized it and became possessed of it. If that happened, the new possessor could, if sufficiently strong and heroic by nature, challenge Sauron, become master of all that he had learned or done since the making of the One Ring, and so overthrow him and usurp his place. This was the essential weakness he had introduced into his situation in his effort, largely unsuccessful, to enslave the elves, and in his desire to establish a control over the minds and wills of his servants. There was another weakness. If the One Ring was to be actually unmade, annihilated, then its power would be dissolved, Sauron's own being would be diminished to vanishing point, and he would be reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. But that he never contemplated nor feared. The ring was unbreakable by any smithcraft less than his own. It was indissoluble in any fire, save the undying subterranean fire where it was made, and that was unapproachable, in Mordor. Also, so great was the ring's power of lust that anyone who used it became mastered by it. It was beyond the strength of any will, even his own, to injure it, cast it away, or neglect it. So he thought. It was in any case on his finger. Thus, as the Second Age draws on, we have a great kingdom and an evil theocracy, for Sauron is also the god of his slaves, growing up in Middle-earth. In the West, actually the Northwest is the only part clearly envisaged in these tales, lie the precarious refuges of the elves, while men in those parts remain more or less uncorrupted, if ignorant. The better and nobler sort of men are in fact the kin of those that had departed to Numenor, but remain in a simple Homeric state of patriarchal and tribal life. We're going to pause here. This is the first portion of the Second Age, the Rings of Power. The next will be concerning Numenor in my next video. Well, let me know. Let me know what you think of Tolkien's version of the Rings of Power. And if you are so inclined, write what you think of the fake version of the Rings of Power, which will be inflicted on the planet soon. Have a great day. Have a great day. And be certain to listen to what Tolkien has to say about his story.